Today, we're talking about X factors off the bench for the Chicago Bulls and if they can help this team get out of the play-in situation this upcoming season. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Buzelis slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it as we are talking about X factors off of the bench and can they help this team get beyond the play-in situation this upcoming season. And so, look, this is a little bit of a hypothetical because we haven't gotten to training camp. We haven't gone through preseason. And so we don't know what the starting lineup is. We don't know what the potential rotation could look like. And so this is going to be a little bit of a hypothetical. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the starters from last season. And so assuming that the same starters from last season at the end of the year, which was Modest Buzelis, you had Nikola Vucevic, Kobe White, Kevin Huerter, Josh Giddey. Those are all the starters. And so we're going to go from there, and then we're going to add the new players on the bench, and we're going to talk about who can make the impact the most and just really talk about that. So starting with the player that I think is going to have the most amount of impact, assuming that the starting five is the same from last season, it would be Ayo Dosunmu. And so for those who have watched the show before, I've said this with Ayo, I think that he's a player that really could be in the sixth man of the year award running. Like, I think he can definitely do that. And that obviously would be, having to be attached to a team that clearly is winning and things like that. But make no mistake about it. If the Bulls do turn it around, I think he definitely would be a candidate for that award. And I think if the Bulls were to trade him, which I'm not in favor of doing so, and he gets to a winning situation, I think that Ayo Dosunmu could be in the sixth man of the year running. And so for me, I think you're looking at a player that just has the ability to play both ends of the floor, which we've talked about that before. But I really think that he is set to have a major jump in this offensive system. I think that if he's coming off the bench, he would essentially run the second unit. And I think that you're looking at a guy that with his defensive intensity, he's going to create offensive opportunities that way, which really is going to fit with what the Chicago Bulls want to do as far as getting up and running. I love the fact that he can distribute the basketball as a point guard because we've seen him do that before as well. And so he kind of plays that combo guard, situation very well. And then next, this is a guy that, look, I'm not saying that he's going to stop a power forward or anything like that, but if he does get matched up on a 4 or even a 5, I think he's going to make it difficult for that player to score. He's just not going to just give them a basket. And so I think that Ayo Dosunmu definitely would be an impactful player for the Bulls, and you need that mentality if you're going to turn things around. And so certainly I think he would be my first X factor off the bench. And so the next X factor off the bench, assuming that the starting lineup is the same from last year, for me, it would be Tre Jones. I think that Tre Jones would have the second most impact off the bench because when you go back and you look at what he did as far as just offensively and defensively, I think that he really made it more of a decision, or he made more of a decision for the front office to move off of Lonzo Ball. Now, I'm not saying that he's Lonzo Ball or anything like that, but I think that he made like Lonzo Ball type of plays, especially when you look at the offense and just really how he's able to generate things as a true point guard. This is a guy that doesn't get sped up. I loved how he finished in the paint. He's a guy that can score off the 3 ball on low efficiency as far as like just not taking a lot of shots. So not low efficiency, but just low volume for Tre Jones. And so I love everything that we saw there. And then defensively, he's not a player that he necessarily gets, taken advantage of on the defensive end. Like, it's not like teams were going out and saying, okay, hey, we want to get him in the pick and roll. I thought that he competed very well. He plays the passing lanes and things like that. He's a willing passer. And so that is some of the things that we saw with Lonzo Ball. It's just that Lonzo did it in a different way. And so I think that Tre Jones being really an orchestrator off the bench and being a point guard, which is something that Billy Donovan definitely relies on, is guard play, that Tre Jones would be the second biggest X factor off the bench. And I think that definitely he would be a player that could help this team get out of the play-in situation. The next impact player off the bench for me, it would be Isaac Okoro. I think that he would definitely be, the third X factor off the bench. And I think that this is something that could shift depending on how the season goes. And so that's another hypothetical. We wouldn't know, just how the season's going and things like that, because that's clearly going to dictate how Billy Donovan would, throw players out there. And so for me, if we're just going off, just the start, we don't know anything right now, I would go with Isaac Okoro as my third best, because I think for him, once again, you get a guy that is switchable. You get a guy that is going to help your defense. And I think for him, you don't necessarily have to run a play, but the difference between him and Ayo Dosunmu is that with Ayo, he's a guy that you can trust with the ball in his hand. He can, go ahead and generate offense for you and things like that. I think that with Isaac Okoro, he's more of a guy that he's going to be a finisher. I don't think that he would necessarily be like a point forward. I think he's the guy that you want that is going to finish the breaks. And I think that he has a real chance to take off this season if he can prove that he can be a finisher off the break as far as shooting the three-point shot, if he can get to spots on the floor and kind of be a knockdown shooter that way when the ball swings over to him. So making defenses pay and using his athleticism. And so that's why I have Ayo Dosunmu ahead of him, because he's a guy that can put it on the deck. He can get his points that way. And then also, too, you can feed him and he can get points that way. And I think with Isaac Okoro, I think he's a little bit more dependent on somebody else kind of setting the table for him. And so the next player coming off the bench that I think would be an X factor here for us would have to be Zac Collins. And we've talked about this with just his defense and his ability to bring that toughness. And I know that we didn't get to see the best of Zac Collins offensively, but you saw flashes of that, because he can hit the three ball and he will take the three ball. I think he's a terrific passer at the top of the key as well. And so, if you're cutting and things like that, he'll find you, which is something that you need. I talked about this in yesterday's video that, yes, you do want to try to run teams and wear them out, but at some point you do have to execute in the half court, which is why I think between him and Tre Jones, there's value there, because both of those guys are terrific passers and they're great finishers inside. So Zac Collins would definitely, I think, be the big man that would come off the bench to come get Vooch and really bail him out, especially if he's struggling defensively, gets in foul trouble and things like that. Or, maybe if Billy Donovan wants to maybe run him out there early and put him at the a position right next to Vooch, I think he would definitely be in the mix here. And so next, it comes down to players where it gets a bit tight, because now we're talking about the rotation, maybe being, 9, 10 players or something like that. And it's really a toss up. And so I'm hoping that we see something from Jalen Smith because of what he could bring as far as the size and everything like that. I do think that there is going to be some real value in playing, some the two center lineups. I think that this would be something that Billy Donovan could perhaps lean on this season and be able to beat some teams up in the paint, especially if you are demanding that the guards start to get the ball to these guys, either on the post, or make sure that you get it down to these guys as they're cutting and getting in position, against some of these mismatches and things like that. I think that that's something that the Bulls could have done a better job on last season, which is taking advantage of the mismatches when they got them. And so let's see what happens. This is why I pencil Jalen Smith in. I'm thinking that he has a chance to take a step forward, especially if he has a good camp. Again, we'll see what happens with this. This is all hypothetical. And then I think on the maybe outside looking in would be Julian Phillips, even though I think he's right there between, both of those players. I could see one of those guys being at the tail end of the rotation. I think with Julian Phillips, to me, he takes a step forward and he does pass Patrick Williams. I think that he does do that. And I think that we saw signs of that last year. And so without getting to a training camp or just getting into the preseason, last year you already saw that there were times where he would come off the bench before Patrick Williams, which indicates to me that if Julian Phillips has taken a step forward in any way, I think he's definitely going to be in your rotation. And look, you love his athleticism. You love what he can do defensively. I think it's just going to be more so, okay, can he take advantage, with those cuts and things like that offensively to where you can find him? Can he be a guy that he can put it on the deck and create his own offense? Because if he can do that, get himself to the mid-range, be comfortable with those things, and then get out of just being a 3-and-D type of player, I think that you can move him up in the rotation. And so bottom line here, bench is going to have to play a factor in this team getting past the play-in. And so I didn't mention the starters at all because this was all about the bench. And so I think it's going to be all about Billy Donovan making the adjustments, getting players out there, and just really trying to get other teams into some mismatch situations and utilizing your speed and your height to your advantage. And so let's see if we get that. And I do think that this bench really, look, they're young, they're hungry, and I think that that is exactly what you're going to need to push out of the play-in, because when you look at the teams like the Pistons, I think that they definitely had a bench. I think that when you look at just the teams that eventually end up winning the title, you have to have a bench. And so this is where these guys are going to have to step up if this team is going to take a step forward. So anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here, what are you guys thinking? Assuming that it is the same starting lineup from last year, and then we add the new players onto the bench. And so talking about Ayo Dosunmu. So even though he's not new, he's coming back from the injury. And then also to Isaac Okoro. And then you're getting back Tre Jones, who missed the end of the year or towards the end of the year with the injury and everything else. Who do you think is going to be the biggest factor off of this bench? What is your order? And do you think that this bench has enough to help the starters and help push this team out of the play-in? Because I definitely think they do. It's just going to come down to, did they put in the work? Are they going to get the opportunities? And so that goes into, again, with Billy Donovan, having to trust your bench and make the adjustments. And so you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. And as we always say, look, go Bulls. I'll see you on the next one. And one last thing, I just want to thank all of you guys out there who have subscribed and just definitely check out the content. It means a lot to us here at Chicago Bulls Insider. So appreciate that. Keep coming back for the videos. And once again, go Bulls. I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.